Like so many that enjoy the countryside, I really appreciate a piece of art that depicts that countryside. Could be a painting, sculpture, or even a stick where the head of it is carved and is something that is delightful to have and to hold. But every so often something new comes along, something new, something original, and something unique. Something like Nick Orr, who has the ability and a wonderful skill to depict an entire day shooting or hunting in a single feather. But Nick, your artwork is so original, so unique, it's just so fine in detail and everything goes with it. As a layman from an artist's point of view, a photographer maybe, but I look at it and it just sings to me that this is somebody who's been to art college, that went on to university, that worked through some kind of a creative apprenticeship, and then you found this, you know, at some time later in your life and you produce it. But it's not the case, is it, Nick?
No, thanks very much for coming today, Matt. It's been a pleasure having you around. But actually, you're right, couldn't be further from the truth. There was no art college, no degree. It's just a life in the countryside, enjoying what I see around me. And then I stumbled into it, purely by accident, really, and it's all gone from there.
So where did it really start? Where was the start? I mean, I've looked at the pieces you've made. I've seen many photographs of the piece you've made, and there is a theme in there, and it is all about the countryside. That's something that is it's quite clearly your passion. Where did that start, Nick? You know, and I mean that must have been the start of the journey that ended up with the artwork, didn't it?
Absolutely. Started off in a little village in Derbyshire, where I was born and bred. I was very fortunate. We lived in a little cottage on a dairy farm, and that's where the love of the countryside started. It was just a great place to be brought up. And I had a family friend called Dennis, and I think of him so dearly. He was the one that taught me to shoot, to fish, got me into hunting, rabbiting, ferreting, and he really sparked that interest in the countryside that's been with me ever since. And it's because of that love of the countryside that I still do what I do today. I go shooting a lot, I pick up endless days with the Labradors every season. And it's doing that when I'm out picking up, I get to see all the pheasants flying, the hares running, that I actually try and put in my work. So that's where it came from, not an art scholarship or degree. It's from being outside. I mean, I often say I'm not an artist, I'm a countryman that produces artwork with feathers.
So Dennis is the inspiration. Now, what about Mum and Dad? Did Mum and Dad, were they from the hunting, shooting, fishing background? So you know, was there anything there, or are you sort of the, dare I say it, coming from Derbyshire, the black sheep of the family when you went into that particular lifestyle?
You're not far off, actually. No, Mum and Dad weren't into it at all. As I say, if it hadn't been for that family friend Dennis, I could have gone down a completely different road. But a lot of my friends were farmers. There wasn't a lot else in the village apart from farming. It was dairy farming, sheep farming. So involved in that community, that was where we ended up, and that's what we were going to do. And so I was very, very fortunate. So we had a lot of friends with a lot of land, and that's what we did. There wasn't much else to do in a tiny little village. If you weren't into shooting or fishing or rabbiting, there was not a lot else. We didn't have Netflix back then, did we? So yeah, that's what we did.
Absolutely true, yeah. And that took you up to the point of leaving school then, did it?
Pretty much, yeah. I stayed in Derbyshire till left school, and then not long after joined the Navy as a boy. And then it was all moved down south to Portsmouth. Lived in Portsmouth for 8 years while I was in the Navy. Met my wife Claire.
And what was your specialism in the Navy?
I was a weapons engineering artificer. So I kept the gun thing going to a degree. But I ended up specialising in sort of missile systems, communications, electronic warfare, that type of thing. Although we did fix everything right up to the big 4.5-inch guns on the forecastle.
Okay. And after the Navy?
I was very fortunate when I left the Navy. I had a really, one of those lucky breaks that some people get in life. The Navy taught me a lot about computers and networking, and when I came out, it was 1999, just as the internet bubble was about to go bang. And they were really, really looking for IT specialists. And the Navy taught me really, really well, gave me a lot of training. And I just walked into the first job was in IT, and I was headhunted from there. Within 6 months of leaving the Navy, I was an IT director. I hated it. I was living in Kent at the time, and it was 2 hours into London, up to 3 hours back, depending on the trains, long days. And I've never been more miserable. I earned a lot of money, but sat at a desk just dreaming of being outside, going back shooting, fishing, working the dogs. I've got dogs again, and that's all I wanted to do. And I say I've never been more miserable, and so I made a big decision to make a change.
Yeah, how many people have we met in our lifestyle that, you know, in our careers, and people we've met socially that have had that great challenge in life that we can go and do something where we can earn a very good salary, but we absolutely hate what we're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas then we've got the people in life who earn a fraction of that, a minimal amount, but they're doing something that they love, that they're passionate about, and they totally enjoy.
Dead right.
And I take it you went into the latter sometime after London then?
Absolutely. I took one of the craziest decisions people think I've ever taken. Remember it clearly, going to the station one day, and I turned to Claire and said, I'm going to give all this up. And she said, what? You can't be serious. I said, yeah. I said, I'm going to give it up. And she said, we're going to do what? And I said, we're going to work together. And we're either going to have a dog kennels or something similar. And as it happens, we ended up buying a pet shop and dog grooming parlour, believe it or not, as a stopgap. It was 2002, and we said, well, we'll do this for a bit, something to tide us over, until we decide what we really want to do. And 18 years later, we were still doing it.
So we go from Derbyshire with a couple of jobs into the Navy. We sort of enjoy the Navy, but we know it's time to move on, and we end up as an IT director in London, which, if we're honest with ourselves, we hate because of the London commute, the old thing, 5 hours a day, sat on a train, just wanting to be back on a field with a dog or a fishing rod by a lake. And we suddenly find ourselves with a dog grooming parlour, and come on, Nick, I mean, how does that fit into this lifestyle?
What that allowed me to do is go picking up and work the dogs whenever I wanted. That working for yourself and having Claire as a business partner doing the other side of it meant that my working day was spent training dogs. So it was either working dogs for the shooting men, or did a lot with pets actually as well, problem dogs. But that allowed me to take whenever I wanted off to go picking up, and that's my passion, working the Labradors. Yeah. And it was when I was working the Labradors, I used to bring a lot of birds home to eat. I don't like to see anything wasted, and I was breasting out a cock pheasant, absolute glorious bird. I can see it now on the chopping block, and all I do is breast them out. And there wasn't a mark on it. I think one of my dogs had pegged it. It was immaculate. And Chloe was with me and the daughter and said, Dad, can I have some feathers for a collage? I said, yeah, of course you can. So I remember ripping some of the breast feathers off and giving them to him. She gave me some of the wing feathers and the tail feathers. And I'd already breasted it out and thought, what a waste. Once I've finished with this is going in the bin. And it's beautiful, magnificent bird. There's got to be something I can do with this. And so I experimented, took loads of feathers off, had a play with it, and I tried all sorts, and it all looked rubbish. And it was whilst I was trying some different ideas, I'd got some feathers together, and they were all sort of in a fan shape, and I cut across them to make a shape. And I noticed that the bits I'd cut off didn't fall apart. Even the bits where I completely cut it off the quill. And you'd think, as a fly tie, I'm used to feathers falling to bits on me. And they didn't. And I remember pulling this bit up and looking at it and thinking, how the heck is that still together? And that was the start. That was the very first glimmer of inspiration. I thought, well, there's something in this, and let's take it on from there.
Nick, I know it took some time, but you ended up eventually with a bronze turkey feather. What was the great advantage of that?
But it was the first time I could create a scene, an actual picture, something that we would re-recognise rather than just a piece of art. And it was the first time I'd framed it as a bronze turkey feather. And when I showed people for the first time, they said it was a buzzard, it was a goshawk, some other extravagant bird of prey. And when you tell them it's a turkey feather, they don't believe it. Because we don't see a turkey as a pretty bird. They're seen, hate to say it, as an ugly bird, really. But the feathers are magnificent. And if I give you one now, or most people, and said, what's that? They go, because of the size, because of the colour, and it's a bird of prey. It's not, it's bronze turkey, and that's a bit special.
Nick, can you, because it's so unique what you do, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I've seen feathers stuck in jars and said it's a piece of art. I've seen feathers stuck on a background with a picture behind it and said it's artwork. But yours is so unique, it's so original, so different.
Thank you.
Can you just talk us through in brief outline? We're not asking for trade secrets here, but can you just talk us through the process of, we've got a feather and we end up with this magnificent artwork that's in a frame. What's the process of doing that, Nick?
Most of my pictures are commissions, to be honest, and so somebody will say I would like a spaniel, a horse, hunting scene, whatever. So the first thing is I start to sketch the ideas out. Bearing in mind, again, I've only got a very, very small canvas. If you said to me as a watercolour artist, I like a picture of my spaniel or me out shooting, I could do one 6 foot by 6 foot. I've got 3.5 centimetres by 30 centimetres to work with. So I've always got that in the back of the mind. Sketch out a rough design, positioning, and I know that the different parts of the feather will cut in a different way. So if you ever look at my work, nearly all the detail, the super fine detail, is towards the tip of the feather. That's where the barbules are the thinnest, that's where they're the finest, and that's where I can get that super detail from. So a stag will always be on the right hand side, almost always. The detail's on the right. So once I've done the design, it's then into choosing a feather. And I mentioned earlier, they have to be perfect. Twisted barbule, it won't have this Velcro effect. When I cut it, it'll just fall apart. And I'm also looking at the colouring. I'm trying to match up colouring to the animal, but also I don't want, a lot of my feathers have zebra stripes on them, I don't want a white area on a super fine detail area because you won't have that contrast.
Yep.
I'm looking for the dark part of the feather on the super fine detail, and that way when it's mounted, you'll get that contrast, that silhouette effect, otherwise you would just lose it. So, got the feather.
So what you're saying there, Nick, is that you might have 3 feathers that have been graded from a milliner, and you look at all 3 of them, and all 3 are perfect, but they're only perfect for a particular picture.
Dead right. And in fact, I will start the morning, when I go into selecting a feather, I'll normally choose 20 for size, because I know I'll need a really, really broad one or a shorter one. I'll take the 20 I need for the size, and it will take me all morning, 4 hours to choose that feather. And again, you're looking at your sketch, you're looking at the feather, you're looking to see if there's any imperfections, and then I normally get down to 3, and then that's the hard bit, is it that one? And it's just then personal preference, that's just my eye then, and say, no, actually, that one will make the better feather for this picture. And then once I've got the feather, then the process starts.
Come on then, what's the process? Because I've watched you earlier today. I mean, you have the goggles on, the scalpels there. I mean, the detail is so fine, but talk us through that process. You know, here we are, this is a feather we're going to use. We've got a sketch in front of us that is going to be, how do we make it come to life? Where's the magic done? You
wouldn't believe the first thing I do to the feather, and when I tell people, they look at me a little bit like, really? I iron it. The thing is, when I get the feathers, they're curved. They're naturally curved as a flight feather. When I'm cutting them on the board, they have to be perfectly flat. They just can't be curved. So I've got an old iron and an ironing board, and I heat the quill up very, very gently, turning it one side then the other. And because it's a similar material to fingernails, eventually it softens. And once it's softened, I can then press it into a position. And I don't have any expensive equipment. Once it's flat, I put it on a board and I put a slab of shotgun cartridges on the top. And that's heavy enough to hold it flat for 24 hours. And once I lift that slab of shotgun cartridges off, that feather's perfectly flat for now, and that allows me enough time then to carve it. But if I leave it too long, it starts to take on its natural shape again. So that's the very, very first part of the process. And once it's flat, then I can get the scalpels ready, get the big magnifier ready, and then we start. And we start towards the thick end of the quill, and we work towards the fine detail at the soft end. And it's a case of, most people think I cut them, and I use the word cut, but it's not a very good description. If you cut with a scalpel and drag the scalpel, those barbules pull apart, and they fall apart, and it happens quite regularly, unfortunately. So it's more of a stippling motion, and the best analogy I can give you is a tattoo gun. A tattoo, this makes the picture with thousands of little indentations, thousands of little needle presses, and that's what I do. So each barbule might take 3 or 4 presses of the scalpel to cut through it. And that way, by cutting from the back to the front, from the outside in, you're pushing those barbules together.
Yeah, you're compressing them, yeah.
And the whole image is actually pricked out or cut out with the scalpel. So you would look at it and say, well, he's not done anything. He's been at this for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
and you can't see anything. So only when you hold it up to the light, you can see the shape. And then very, very carefully, painstakingly, I start to pull away the waste. And the waste is virtually pulled away one barbule at a time. And quite often that's where it goes wrong. You think you're finished, you're in a rush, and you start to pull the waste. And if you haven't cut through it perfectly, as you pull the waste, the barbules open up and the whole thing falls to bits.
So, I know we spoke earlier, Nick. You said that, you know, on a typical day, a couple of hours is about as much as you can work because it is such fine detail and such. I mean, you know, I know you use a surgeon's scalpel, but the analogy of a surgeon working on something very fine is not a bad one at this level, isn't it?
It is difficult, I'll be honest. I'm not trying to make it harder than it is, but the concentration is immense. And as I say, it only takes one slip. You can't glue these things back together. And one tiny, just lapse of concentration, 3 weeks work just goes in the bin. And you start again. So it pays me to work to my optimum, have a break, come out, spend some time with the dogs, do a bit of dog training, have a breather, go back, do another 2 hours. There's just no way I could sit there for 8 hours and just work solidly through. I'd end up throwing more in the bin than I ever framed.
But over a period of time, and as we said earlier, it could actually be weeks. Eventually we've got the feather and we've got it cut and it's everything to go, and the waste or whatever we're going to do with the pieces that come away from it, but we've got a feather. What do we do with that feather then, Nick?
Right, so there's that feather and normally lots of components that I've cut out of that feather. So if there's pheasants flying, every single bird that you'll see on that frame came from that one feather, and it's actually like a jigsaw. As I start to pull away the waste, there might be a pheasant tucked in there under a deer antler, and all those component parts are pulled out, spread out and laid out on a board, and then I've got an idea of exactly where they're going, and I mark the board, and each piece is mounted on a pin, a tiny pin, as thin as I can get them, about 25 mil high. And the idea is that once they're mounted on the pin, including the feather itself, that's mounted off the board, it gives a sense of depth. It gives a drop shadow, and it gives that illusion of flight, and it makes it 3D. It's not just stuck to the board flat, they're actually flying off the paper, and it gives it a real magical touch. That's what makes the big difference, the fact that it's lifted off the board.
Nick, thanks for your time today. I've absolutely had an amazing day. I've seen your pictures before, and I know that I've photographed you a couple of times, but it was always a bit of a rush to do it. But to watch you doing it, it is absolutely amazing, and I'm jealous of the skill and talent you've got. But I'll be honest with you, I'm more jealous of the lifestyle that you've got and everything that goes around it. So yeah, but no, thank you for your time today, and the very best luck in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for coming. Really enjoyed it.
Pleasure. Thank you. I've had an absolutely super day. Spending time with Nick, watching him work, which is absolutely inspiring. I spent time with his family, who support him so well. But his work, it's so unique and it's so original. He may not have gone to art college, may not have gone to university. And I don't think he's missed out by not doing so. Let's be honest, who could have taught him what he does? Because nobody else does what Nick Orr does. Till next time.